There is a particular kind of courage that has nothing to do with bravery in any conventional sense. It is the courage of a person who has prepared carefully, who has done the work, who has everything ready, and then walks into a room and looks at what is actually there and understands, in the space of a single breath, that the thing they prepared is the wrong thing entirely. Most people, in that moment, continue with what they prepared, because preparation is a form of protection, because abandoning it requires trusting something that cannot be rehearsed. Robin Williams trusted it. He trusted it his entire career, in large venues and small ones, on film sets and in hospital corridors and in the unscheduled spaces between scheduled things. But there was one evening in Los Angeles, in the spring of 1992, when that trust was tested in a way it had never quite been tested before in a room of 50 people, for a family he had never met, around a child whose face told him everything he needed to know about what the evening actually required. This is the story of that evening, of what Robin Williams walked into, and what he set down, and what he gave instead. Of the Beaumont family, Tom and Linda and their 3 children, and of the smallest of those children, 8-year-old Grace, who sat in the 3rd row of a folding chair audience in a community hall and changed the direction of a performance without saying a single word. And of what Robin Williams chose to do when he saw her there. The Beaumont family had lost their home on a Tuesday morning in March 1992. The fire started in the utility room at the back of the house, an electrical fault. No warning, no time. Tom Beaumont was at work. Linda was at the grocery store with Grace, age 8, and Daniel, age 6. Their eldest, 17-year-old Michael, was at school. No one was inside when it started. They lost the house, but not each other, the thing Tom Beaumont would repeat for years as what kept the weight of it from crushing him completely. What they also lost was everything that constituted the material record of their life. Photographs, the children's drawings, Linda's mother's jewelry, the small accumulated objects that become, without anyone noticing, the physical vocabulary of who a family is. All of it gone. They moved into a cousin's spare rooms. Tom went back to work. Daniel, at 6, processed the displacement mostly as disruption. But Grace Beaumont, at 8 years old, was precisely old enough to understand what had happened and precisely young enough to have no tools for managing the understanding. She stopped drawing. Grace had been prolific. The refrigerator was always covered with her work. At the cousin's house, offered paper and colored pencils, she looked at them and did not pick them up. She was not crying. She was not acting out. She was simply present in a way that was slightly too still for an 8-year-old, and her parents recognized the stillness and did not know how to reach it. It was Linda Beaumont's co-worker, Patricia Walsh, who organized the fundraiser. She arranged the community hall, contacted local businesses, and assembled 50 people for a Saturday evening in late April. Through a connection she has described ever since as one of those things you cannot explain, she sent a message asking if Robin Williams might be willing to perform. She received a phone call from Robin Williams himself. He said yes. The community hall in Silver Lake was not a performance venue. It was the kind of space that serves a neighborhood's practical needs rented for meetings and birthday parties, and exactly this kind of community gathering, folding chairs in rows. A low platform at one end that served as a stage, fluorescent overhead lights. A card table near the entrance where Patricia Walsh and 2 volunteers managed the donations. 50 people who had come because they cared about the Beaumonts and wanted to be useful. Robin Williams arrived an hour before the event. He walked the space, spoke briefly with Patricia Walsh, grateful and slightly overwhelmed, spoke with Tom Beaumont, who shook his hand with the grip of a man trying to hold himself together and partially succeeding, and met Linda Beaumont, who thanked him with the directness of someone who had moved past being surprised by kindness. He had prepared material, warm, accessible, calibrated for a mixed audience. He had the material in his body the way he always had material, not memorized word for word, but inhabited, ready. Then someone brought him a glass of water and he stood near the low platform and looked at the room as the 50 guests found their seats. That was when he saw Grace Beaumont. She was in the third row. 8 years old, with her father's dark hair and her mother's careful eyes, wearing a yellow cardigan that was slightly too large the cousin's daughter's clothes, borrowed since the fire, nothing fitting quite right. She sat very still in the folding chair with her hands in her lap, looking at the low platform at the front of the room, not at Robin Williams, at the platform. Her brother Daniel sat beside her, already restless, turning in his chair, kicking his heels against the chair legs, showing the ordinary 6-year-old's relationship to being asked to sit still. Her brother Michael, 17, sat on the other side of Daniel, one large hand on his little brother's shoulder in the patient, practiced way of a teenager who has been managing this particular dynamic for years. But Grace was still. Robin Williams looked at her from the side of the room for a long moment. He looked at the yellow cardigan that was slightly too large. He looked at her hands in her lap. He looked at her face at the expression that was not sadness in any dramatic sense, but the specific, quiet expression of a child who has lost something she cannot name and is sitting in the presence of people who are trying to help and is not sure how to receive the help. He had been 8 years old himself once, in a large, quiet house where the help that was needed was not the kind that was offered. He knew something about that stillness. He knew what it held. He looked at the material he had prepared, and he looked at Grace Beaumont, and he understood, in the space of a single breath, that the material was the wrong thing entirely. The evening opened with Patricia Walsh at the low platform, thanking everyone for coming, explaining the situation, expressing the community's love for the Beaumont family. Tom and Linda sat in the front row with their 3 children. Grace sat between her parents, still in the yellow cardigan, still very still. Patricia introduced Robin Williams. He walked to the low platform to genuine warmth, these 50 people were, glad he had come, glad for the gesture, ready to be entertained. He took the microphone. He looked at the room. He began with the material he had prepared. The opening minutes were what the room expected: warm, funny. The particular energy of Robin Williams when he was reading a room carefully and feeding it exactly what it needed. The adults laughed. Daniel, 6 years old in the third row, laughed. Even Michael, 17, allowed himself to be pulled in. Grace Beaumont did not laugh. She watched, with the same careful attention she had brought to the low platform before the evening began. Not hostile, not closed, simply watching, with the expression of a child who is being offered something and is not certain it is the right thing. Robin Williams saw it. He saw it the way he always saw things, in a room constantly, comprehensively, the scanning attention that operated beneath the performance at all times. He kept the material going for another few minutes, giving the room what it had come for, giving himself time to decide. Then, in the middle of a bit, a long, well-constructed piece that was generating good laughter from the adults and had Daniel practically out of his chair, Robin Williams stopped, not abruptly, not dramatically. He let the bit find a natural pause, held it for a beat, and then simply did not continue it. The room noticed a shift in the quality of the silence. Robin Williams stood on the low platform and looked at the third row. At Grace Beaumont in the yellow cardigan with her hands in her lap. "Hey," he said. His voice had changed, not to something softer or more sentimental, just to something more direct, more present. The performance register had dropped away, and something else was there instead. "What's your name?" he said. Grace looked at him, a long beat. The room was completely still. "Grace," she said. "Hi, Grace," Robin said. "I'm Robin. I wanted to say something to you." He stepped off the low platform. He walked across the room to the third row. He crouched down in front of Grace Beaumont's folding chair, bringing himself to her eye level, his large body in its particular crouch, the way he had crouched in countless rooms for countless people who needed him to be at the same height. "I heard about your house," he said quietly. Not quietly enough that the room could not hear, but the volume was for her, not for the room. "I heard that the drawings on your refrigerator were really something." Grace looked at him. Her expression shifted. Something moved in it. something that had been very still, beginning, slightly, to move. "They were mine," she said. Her voice was small and steady. "I drew them." "I know," Robin said. "That's what I heard." He reached into his jacket pocket. He had nothing in it he had prepared. No props, no gifts. But the gesture of reaching was instinctive, a physical expression of the intention to give something. And when his hand came out of the pocket empty, he looked at it for a moment with the expression of a man improvising in real time. "I don't have anything in there," he said. "That was embarrassing. I thought I had something, and I don't." Grace Beaumont's face did something it had not done since the fire. She smiled. What followed over the next 2 hours was not a stand-up performance in any recognizable sense. It was not a community benefit evening in any recognizable sense. It was something that the 50 people in that room have never been able to fully describe, but that all of them have spent years trying to. Robin Williams returned to the low platform, but he did not return to the material. He sat on the edge of the platform, legs dangling, microphone held loosely, and began to improvise from the room itself. Not from the usual resources of his improvisation, not from news or culture or the abstract comedy of contemporary life. From this room, from these people, from what was actually present. He asked Grace questions. Not continually, not in a way that placed her at the center of unwanted attention, but periodically, gently, with the specific skill of a person who can make one child in a room feel seen without making them feel exposed. He asked her about the drawings, what she drew, whether she had favorites, what was on the refrigerator when the fire happened. Grace answered, slowly at first, then with increasing directness. She told him about a drawing she had made of the family's cat, which had survived the fire and was currently living at the cousin's house and eating too much. She told him that the cat's name was Mr. Patterson, and that Mr. Patterson had opinions about the cousin's other cat that she found unreasonable. Robin Williams spent 6 minutes on Mr. Patterson and the cousin's cat. 6 minutes of improvised material built entirely from what an 8-year-old girl had just told him, delivered with the full commitment of a performer at the peak of his gifts, but at the service of this child, this room, this specific evening. The adults in the hall laughed until they were incapable of further laughter. Daniel, 6 years old, fell off his chair. Michael, 17, had both hands pressed to his face. Grace Beaumont laughed, not the polite, performed laugh of a child trying to meet an adult's expectation. The real laugh, the laugh that comes from a child who has been completely surprised, who had no idea the thing was going to be funny and found it funny anyway, who was laughing at something specific and genuine rather than at the idea of being entertained. Linda Beaumont, in the front row, had both hands over her mouth. Tom Beaumont was crying, but Robin Williams did not stay in the comedy. He moved through the evening the way he moved through every room, responsive, reading, following what the room gave him rather than imposing what he had planned. The laughter came in waves, and between the waves, he spoke differently. He talked about loss, not sentimentally, not with the careful distance of someone managing a difficult subject, but directly, from a person who had experienced his own varieties of it and found, through that experience, that loss was not the thing most people said it was. He talked about what was lost in a fire and what was not. He talked about what a refrigerator drawing actually was, not the paper, not the image, but the act of making it, the person who made it. The fact that the person still existed and still had hands and would make more drawings, and that the next drawing would contain everything the lost drawings had taught her. He looked at Grace when he said this. Grace was looking back at him. "The drawings aren't gone," he said. "They're in you. You made them. They came from you and they went back to you, and they're still there, and they always will be." He was not performing this. He was simply saying something he believed to be true, in the simplest language available to him, to an 8-year-old girl in a borrowed yellow cardigan who needed to hear it. Grace Beaumont nodded. A small nod barely visible, the kind of nod that means, yes, yes, I heard that. Yes, I believe it. The 2 hours ended without anyone in the room appearing to notice the time. Robin Williams returned to comedy for the final 30 minutes, warm, generous, the laughter building to a close, that left the room in a state of collective warmth and exhaustion that is the specific condition produced by a great evening in a small space. The 50 guests stood and applauded not with the mechanical approval of an audience fulfilling an obligation, but with the spontaneous, slightly dazed response of people who had received more than they expected and were not yet entirely sure what to do with it. He did not leave after the applause. He stayed. He spoke to people. He signed things and took photographs and answered questions and accepted thanks with the focused, genuine attention he always brought to the end of an evening. And then, when most of the guests had filtered out and Patricia Walsh's volunteers were beginning to fold the chairs, he went to find the Beaumont family. They were near the exit, Tom and Linda and Michael and Daniel, who had finally run out of energy and was drooping against his father's side. And Grace, slightly apart from the family group, in the borrowed yellow cardigan, holding a piece of paper. She had drawn something. On the back of a program from the evening, a single folded sheet of paper that Patricia Walsh had printed to welcome the guests Grace Beaumont had drawn, in borrowed pen, a picture. It was a house. Simple, the way 8-year-old houses are simple square body. Triangle roof, 4 windows, a door in the center. Smoke coming from a chimney, a cat in the front garden. She held it out to Robin Williams. He took it with both hands. He looked at it for a long moment. His expression was the expression that appeared on his face in the moments when he was receiving something real, open, unguarded, the performance entirely absent. "Mr. Patterson?" he said. "Yes," Grace said. He looked at the drawing. Then he looked at Grace. "Can I keep this?" he said. Grace considered this with the seriousness that 8-year-old children bring to consequential decisions. "Yes," she said, "but you have to take care of it." "I will," Robin said. "I promise." He folded the drawing carefully and put it in his jacket pocket, the same pocket his hand had reached into earlier and found empty. He said goodnight to Tom and Linda, who thanked him again with the inadequate words that people use when adequate words do not exist. He ruffled Daniel's hair. He shook Michael's hand, 2 people from different places on either side of a difficult year, briefly level, and then he drove home with a drawing of a house in his pocket, made by a child who had just remembered how to draw. Grace Beaumont is in her late 30s now. She is an elementary school art teacher in the Los Angeles area. Her classroom walls are covered with her students' work drawings and paintings and collages, every available surface occupied, the refrigerator aesthetic scaled to an entire room. She does not tell the story of that evening often. Not because she has forgotten it, she remembers it with a precision that suggests it has never moved far from the surface, but because she has not found the right language for what it gave her. What she says, when she does speak about it, is this: he didn't try to fix anything. He didn't try to make it okay that the house was gone or that the drawings were gone. He just sat with what was true and made it a little lighter to carry. And then he told me the drawings were still in me. And I believed him. I believed him because of how he said it, not like a speech, like something he actually meant. And I went home that night and I drew something. And the next day I drew something else. And I never stopped again. She pauses. The drawing I gave him, the house with Mr. Patterson? I don't know what happened to it after he died. I hope someone found it. I hope it's somewhere safe. It was just a drawing on the back of a program, made by an 8-year-old in a borrowed pen. But it was the first thing I made after the fire. And I gave it to him because he was the reason I made it. Robin Williams kept the drawing. Several people who were close to him in the years after 1992 have mentioned seeing it framed, eventually, in a simple frame, in his home office in Tiburon. Not displayed prominently, on a shelf, among books and other objects, visible if you were looking for it. A house, simple and square, smoke from the chimney. A cat in the front garden. Made in borrowed pen on the back of a community hall program by a child who had stopped drawing and started again because a man walked into a room, looked at her face, and understood that the thing he had prepared was the wrong thing entirely. and set it down, and gave her something else instead. That is what Robin Williams could do. Not always, not under every condition, not without cost. But in the rooms where it was needed, in the rooms where a person's face told him what was actually required, he could set down what he had prepared and simply be present for what was there. Grace Beaumont drew a house. Robin Williams kept it for the rest of his life. And in her classroom in Los Angeles, 25 years after a spring evening in a community hall in Silver Lake, Grace Beaumont teaches children to draw. She tells them what she knows to be true, that what they make comes from them and goes back to them and stays there, that nothing made with genuine feeling is ever lost. She learned that from a man in a community hall who reached into his jacket pocket and found it empty and made something from the nothing that was there. That is the whole story. That is all of it.